This episode is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com, the #1 seller of games and gaming accessories. And GatheringMagic.com, the #1 resource for Magic the Gathering news and articles.
What's up, everybody? This is Josh, also known as Riker Rider, and here is my Wydwen the Biting Gale Commander deck. Now, some of you may be wondering what Mile is doing back here. Well, these two decks are decks that I like to give to beginner to intermediate commander players looking to step up their game. Because these two, if you're familiar with Wizards' Dual Decks product, these are pretty much even keel decks for people of equal skill. So I like to consider these as dual decks. And I have storyline reasons for putting these decks together too, which I'll get into a little bit shortly. But for right now, I'd like to focus on the great Pixie herself, Wydwen. She's a little bit weakened by damage on the stack, but she's still a very powerful commander. She only costs 4 mana. She has a reasonable sized body, a 3/3 flyer. 3/3 flyer for 4 mana is not bad. But she also has Flash, and she can dodge pretty much any removal that you throw at her by paying blue, black, and 1 life to return her to her owner's hand. This also means that you basically never have to pay general tax for her, as long as you have that 2 mana open, and the way this deck plays you should. She's a great wielder of equipment, but I don't have any equipment in here, because if you start putting powerful equipment in this deck, it can become pretty oppressive to play against, especially, say, Sword of Feast and Famine. You can build pretty much any kind of deck with her, aggro, mid-range, control, and even combo if you really want to, but there are better combo generals for it. And she's a commander that I don't see a lot of for some reason. The character behind this deck is Oona, and she has a very interesting story behind her. If you're interested in her, you can find her tale and her fateful duel with Shalin at MTGS. I'll provide a link to that in the video description, and I'll post a better image of her as well in the video itself. Now let's go ahead and get started. I'll start with the mana base. Given that this is actually a tribal deck, one of my favorite as a matter of fact, my favorite tribe from Lorwyn block was Fairies. And it's not just because of their power level, it's because of what they did storyline-wise, and this will show you a lot of the logic behind the card decisions that I made in building this deck. What the Fairies did was they weren't really evil like everyone says they are. They were full of mischief, and they expanded their own knowledge by hunting for dream stuff, which basically meant they harvested people's thoughts through their dreams. And that's how they got smarter. I have, I believe, 22 fairies to turn Secluded Glen on, so it should basically be an Underground Sea. Polluted Delta to find Sea itself. Watery Grave, Sunken Ruins, and Drowned Catacomb. I believe that's all the dual lands I play in here. I might play one more. Right, Dimir Aqueduct. I do play Dimir Aqueduct. You do get a tempo hit with it, but I like the virtual card advantage in that you can get more mana for less card slots. And people's strip mines should be going after Gaia's Cradles, Cabal Coffers, and other problematic lands anyway. So from my experience, so long as you're not playing in 1v1 and you're not playing with a bunch of jerks, your Karus should be safe. I have a few colorless lands in here as well. Since we are a control deck, we do want to take advantage of Reliquary Tower giving us no maximum hand size. And this deck does do a lot of instant speed things, so if you ever have more than 7 cards in your hand without this, that can be bad, since you're going to wind up having discard a lot. Terrain Generator, I believe I play 23 basic lands to take advantage of it. And like I've been saying in my other features, I really am a fan of this card, and it's not played enough. Next we have Riptide Laboratory, since most of our fairies are also wizards, and it is one of the reasons why I have included one particular non-fairy creature in this deck. You'll see what that creature is at the very end of the creatures section. I have Ghost Quarter, which should be Strip Mine, but I don't have enough Strip Mines to go around. I really need to get off my lazy butt, get some more ink, and run off like 16 Strip Mines for the rest of my decks. Remote Isle. I do play 3 cycling lands in here. I'm not playing the 4th one because black is a secondary color in here. I don't have that much black. Lonely Sandbar. Halimar Depths is a one-time top activation that can play with a couple of other things. And Polluted Mire is my other black one. I feel basic land art is also very important when making a deck that is very flavor-oriented, because basic land art represents the deck's character. If you just slap in random basic lands, some of the more flavor-oriented players, and they are out there should be a lot more than they are, will wonder what you're doing. I've got 15 of these, and I have 8 swamps. These are, I believe these basic lands are supposed to represent Glen Elendra, which is the home of Queen Oona and her fairies. So there should be 8 of these. And Soul Ring I've decided to group with my mana because it's the only artifact accelerant. We generally don't want to tap out at all with this deck. I'll move on to the creatures themselves. Almost all of them are fairies. There's one exception. I've grouped them by creatures that have flash versus creatures that don't, with the exception of that one. Faerie Harbinger searches for a fairy card. It does not just have to get creatures, it can find Bitter Blossom. I'm running Faerie Trickery in here to get a counterspell with it if I need to. And she can just end a turn, go get some solution. Inspired Sprite is a looter that can untap whenever you play a wizard, and she has flash as well. I really like her because she can get rid of extra lands and just things you don't need. I have Mistbind Clique, which is not as effective in multiplayer, but this deck is more geared towards duels. I believe the maximum number of players I suggest for a pod when you play this deck is 4. Because after that, you have to spread your resources too thin. But this is basically a 4/4 flyer with mana short attached to it. It can be pretty oppressive to play against, especially if you have a way to keep returning it to your hand, such as a Crystal Shard. And I've avoided playing Crystal Shard in here specifically for that reason, to make it harder to perform a soft block with Mistbind Clique. I mean, they can still play instants in their upkeep, but that's about it. I have Pestermite, which is generally used to untap a creature or untap land. One of my favorite things to do with this is tap below 1 blue mana to make them see that I don't have a hard counterspell. Use Pestermite to untap my island and then counter the thing. Scion of Oona can get in the way of some of your effects, but generally I like using it as a counterspell for spot removal, especially if people try to, like, Dismantling Blow kick your Bitter Blossom or something, since Bitter Blossom's a pretty important card. Spellstutter Sprite is another counter. I remember the original Fairies deck in Standards. The people always said that Spellstutter Sprite was one of the weaker counters in the deck, but I think it's a very strong counter here because you're going to have at least 4 fairies most of the time when you want to have it be relevant. And remember, if you don't have any creatures, Spellstutter Sprite can counter top of deck tutors like Vampiric Tutor, Mystical Tutor, Worldly Tutor. Next up is Vendilion Clique, which I'm really hoping is in Modern Masters because the price of this needs to come down. And though I do feel bad for letting go of 2 of these in repacks, it was well worth it to get my PS3 and get rid of a bunch of bulk. But this was before I had a store that would buy bulk, and I needed to get a bunch of bulk out. What they can do is they can look at target player's hand, and you can take a card out of it you don't like. You can target an opponent to see what's in there. Oftentimes, I really like using this just to see what's in their hand, and not cycling a card away unless they have something dangerous. But you can also use it to cycle a card from your hand if you need to. And what Faerie's deck would be complete without Oona? She's going to be the start of our non-flash creatures. If you can untap with her, she generally wins the game, although we do not have an infinite mana outlet in the deck. At least not one that I know of. You can probably assemble one, because this deck likes to play with opponents' cards. But she's in here because what would a Faerie's deck be without their queen? Glenelendra Archmage is essentially a flyer with 2 negates strapped to it. I've seen a lot of oppressive combos with Glenelendra Archmage, especially in combination with Mikaeus. The Mikaeus plus Archmage is basically infinite negates. Or finding some way to give it Undying. There's other ways to give creatures Undying, but I think the Undying mechanic in this deck would be terrible flavor. And the deck can be oppressive to play against as it is. Glenelendra Liege is an anthem for all your fairies, and actually makes the tokens that Oona spits out a 3/3, which I think plays really well with the flavor text. Those who displease Oona soon learn the extent of the army she commands. And turning all your blue and black fairies into 3/3s is just huge. I have Knacksaw Clique in here, which plays with part of the harvesting sub-theme of this deck. And that's divided into 2 different kinds of cards, extraction cards and stealing cards. I do play quite a few of both. The only downside to Knacksaw Clique is its untap ability means you need to generally attack with it first, but it can be a surprise blocker if people aren't paying attention. And since it says card, you can actually play lands with it. So if you have her out, you may want to use her ability before you play a land, so that if you hit a land with it, you can play it. Latchkey Faerie is a 3/1 that cantrips generally. In here, just because it's on Tribe. It was very powerful and limited, but it's only in here because it's on Tribe. If you want to play a serious deck, don't include these bad on-Tribe creatures like Faerie Swarm as well, which just has power and toughness equal number of blue permanents you control. Generally not worth the 4 mana in any other deck, but it's, like I said, in here for theme. Sower of Temptation, probably the most aggressively costed control magic ever because it comes with a 2/2 flyer, and it costs the same as control magic. I think this card actually sees some legacy play. I don't know in what deck, but it does. And Nectar Faerie, we do pay a bit of life with this deck in the form of Bitter Blossom and Phyrexian Arena, so being able to gain some life back while being easily tutorable and staying on Tribe is great. Faerie Macabre is our graveyard hate. Generally, this doesn't get hardcast, but it can be found with Faerie Harbinger, and if you need some grave hate, there it is, and it doesn't cost anything either. Next, we have Sprite Noble, which is an anthem for our fairies. Every tribal deck likes having lords, and that's basically just what she is another lord. Surveilling Sprite, I like as an early blocker because he can block something and give me a card. And it's actually a rogue, which has a couple of... You can do things like, if you're playing it, I don't think I'm playing it anymore, but you can Prowl and Notorious Throng with it. Thieving Sprite takes a card out of their hand. And it's probably the artwork that defines this deck the most, because this in here is exactly what the fairies do. They prowl about at night and harvest people's dreams. Glenlunder Pranksters is one of the engine cards in this deck. It's a more tame version of Erratic Portal or Crystal Shard that's on Tribe and more tutorable. Whenever you cast a spell during opponent's turn, you may return target creature you control to its owner's hand. This can make your creatures dodge removal. You can use this with counter spells to reuse your comes into play creatures like Mistbind Clique. And it's very easy to be able to get a soft block on somebody with Mistbind Clique in this. It is kind of fragile at a 1/3 flyer for 4. And I have a couple of non-creature fairies as well, Bitter Blossom being the best one. Just so much fuel for this deck. You're not really a control deck, you're an aggro control deck. So you don't mind taking a bit of a hit on card advantage. There is not a lot of card advantage in this deck. And then we have Faerie Trickery to counter... Faerie Trickery is just a Dissipate that can't hit fairy spells, but it's worth it not playing Dissipate because you can get this with some of the tutors in here. And we have the one non-fairy creature in the deck, Snapcaster Mage. This guy was added because he's that damn good. I'm sorry, but his... Yeah. Riptide Laboratory just gets absurd with him. He can flashback basically anything in your graveyard. Riptide Laboratory is... I believe that card shot up a whole bunch when this guy was spoiled. Come down now, but he's just that good. Now, being that we like to never tap out, I've got a couple things in here to enable us to play our non-flash cards as though they had flash. Unfortunately, this does not actually give cards flash. And this matters with Mystical Teachings, and I think one other card. I thought about playing Teferi in here, but most of the things we want to flash are non-creatures, as you'll see. But this lets you play things as though they had flash, and Vedalken Orrery lets you play things as though they had flash. I've got a handful of counters in here. Since we are Drago-like, I do want to have a fairly high density of counter magic. We have Counterspell Classic, Arcane Denial, Mana Drain. Misdirection isn't really a counter, but it can be pitched like a counter. Commandeer. Commandeer is one of my favorite cards to play as a surprise. It is expensive in that it does require basically 3 cards, the Commandeer and the 2 blue cards. But it's another pitch counter. Cryptic Commands, whatever you want it to be. Seriously, if you don't know what it does, just take my word for it. It does whatever you want. Spelljack is a dual-purpose card. It plays in not only with the counters, but with the playing with your opponent's cards. This will counter any spell and will let you cast that spell whenever you want. Although you do have to abide by timing restrictions, and you can't steal X spells with it. But it is 6 mana, but I like it. It's essentially a Commandeer that you can play the spell whenever you want, but it's not pitch. Force of Will because free counters. And Desertion is another card that I really like in this format. It can counter anything, but if you counter an artifact or a creature with it, you get it instead. This deck does have more than counters in it. Like I said, it has an extraction sub-theme, and the first card on the order of extraction is, well, extract. This is another card that I don't see played very often in Commander. Even in more serious metas where it's better, and you can expect combo to be played, this can just tear certain decks apart, just going, turn one, I'm going to rip your combo piece out. Like the Micaeus combo decks, what do they do if you rip out their Triskelion turn one? It's just disgusting what you can do to certain decks. It is narrow, though. Jester's Cap, the extraction spell, been around for ages. Can go in any color. Sadistic Sacrament, another good extraction card for Commander. You can get 3 cards with it, or if you have 10 mana, you can get 15 cards with it. Praetor's Grasp lets you extract the card and play it. You do have to pay for it, though, so you can only get certain things. Probably the thing that I grab the most with Praetor's Grasp is somebody's Demo Tutor, so I can get what I want from my deck. But there are other things I've gotten with it. You do need to, if you're going to play this deck a lot, you need to have an idea what's in your opponent's decks, since you are basically playing with their cards. Helm of Possession begins my control magics. You can sack like a Bitter Blossom token or a, Surveilling Sprite or some dork you don't care about to gain control of a creature. Dream Leash is another flavor choice. It's a confiscate that can only be played on a tap permanent, but once you actually gain control of the permanent, it doesn't matter what happens to it. Since I was going for the Dreams theme, I thought this was a perfect fit, and I've got some other nice fits in here for later cards. Control Magic is Control Magic, nothing needs to be said about it. Treachery, nothing needs to be said about that either. It's free Control Magic. Take Possession, steals anything. Blatant Thievery takes something from every player. I really like it. And I know a lot of people like it too. I do have a few cards that are good in multiplayer, not that many. And I also have cards that not only take things on board, but take things from people's decks. Like Bribery, Knowledge Exploitation. I think Knowledge Exploitation is a card that's really underplayed in Commander. Because people have big instants and sorceries too, and you can use this to grab them. Probably the biggest thing I've grabbed with this is a Storm Herd, but there are plenty of other things you can get with it too. Choir, in the same vein as those. Memory Plunder can get things out of the grave. Probably the best thing I've gotten with this is an Increasing Ambition. I have 3 card draw spells. Theft of Dreams was chosen for flavor reasons, obviously, because it's not that good. Phyrexian Arena draws a card every turn. And Blue Sun Zenith. This is all the draw I have in the deck, but the reason why is because if I want a card draw, generally this deck cares more about card draw than it does card selection, so if you get a card selection spell like Mystical Teachings, it's best just to find Blue Sun Zenith with it. About the only thing I'm normally Mystical Teachings for is Blue Sun Zenith. Because you can just go, draw, go, and then if nobody plays anything that you need to deal with, you just can play a Blue Sun Zenith. Demo Tutor gets Blue Sun Zenith. Beseech the Queen, which is not only a flavor hit, but it happens to be a good card. And Mystical Teachings. Unfortunately, you can't Teachings for Teachings in Commander, but Teachings for Blue Sun Zenith twice seems pretty good to me. I've got a few panic buttons in here. Life's Finale also plays with the Extraction sub-theme, but it's mainly as a panic button. Oblivion Stone is another panic button. which you can save things with if you want. Evacuation is another panic button. This should probably be Cyclonic Rift, but you can bounce your own things with Evacuation, which can come in handy. Door of Destinies. We gotta have some way to win the game, right? And Door of Destinies rewards you with an extra anthem every time you play a fairy spell. Makes all your creatures giant over time. And then for reusing enters the battlefield abilities, we have Mimic Vat and Soul Foundry, both of which are a lot of fun to play around with in Commander. Watching CMDR decks, please remember to like, favorite, and subscribe.